Today we're going to show you how to change the Fresh Food Door Gasket on your refrigerator, and it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a 5/16 nut driver and 5/16 wrench and a small putty knife. Let me show you how we do it. Now, although we do not need to remove the door to replace that gasket, it is probably easier to do so. So we'll begin by opening the refrigerator door. We're going to turn the refrigerator off. And we're going to remove the upper hinge for the freezer door first. And it's held in place with either 2 or 3 5/16 screws. Now, before we remove the door, of course, you'll want to remove all of the items that are on the door and just set them aside and cover them up with a blanket or something that will maintain the temperature of them while we're doing the repair. And because we will have both doors removed, you can also cover the complete front of the refrigerator cabinet with a blanket just to keep that temperature stable. So once we remove the screws, we can just lift the hinge up and set that aside. Then very carefully tilt the freezer door forward, rotate it open, and lift it off of the center hinge. And then we're going to set that aside. Now next we'll remove the center hinge, and again it's held in place with 5/16 screws. It's a little difficult to get at the 2 screws on the outside edge, but they don't need to come completely off, they just need to be loosened. And if need be, use a small adjustable wrench or a 5/16 open end wrench. And again, we only need to loosen the 2 outside screws just enough that the hinge will slide out of the opening. We'll remove that center hinge, set that aside. Then we're going to take the refrigerator door and we're going to set it on a suitable work surface so that we can remove the gasket and replace it with the new one. And we'll also want to protect that surface with a blanket so that we can lay the face of the door right on top of it. Now, to remove that gasket, we're simply going to fold it out, and you'll see underneath the edge of the inner door panel, and that clamps right over the leading edge of that gasket. So we're just going to pull up gently on that gasket to separate that liner from the outer door panel, just enough that we can pull the gasket out from behind it. And we're going to continue to do that all the way around. And again, you will need to just lift up gently on it first, just enough to release the edge of that liner. And if need be, you can take your putty knife and aid you with that. Just work at it gently so that you don't crack the inner door. Once you have a couple of sides loosened up, you can then pull the corner away and lift it free. We'll rotate the door around. As we mentioned, you can do this job with the door still intact, but it becomes very difficult to access the bottom of the door, so we find it just as easy to pull that door completely off the refrigerator and do it in this manner. And again, we'll use caution in the corners so that we don't damage the liner. And we can simply lift the old gasket free and discard it. Next, we'll take the new gasket. We're going to lay it on the door, just in roughly the position it should be in. And we'll start by tucking one corner in. Now, this little black rigid rib is going to tuck in behind that little channel on the inner door panel, and it will get sandwiched between the inner door panel and the outer door panel. So you can actually tilt that out enough, rotate it down, and force it in underneath that inner door panel. Then you can just roll back the gasket while you're holding pressure in with your fingertips and verify that it has gone completely into position. You can just work your way down one side a little bit. Pull away the free side, and then we'll work that one into position. And again, you may need your putty knife just to get it started. Now, once we have a corner in position, you can just go along the edge press it into place. As you can see from this view, that rib is going to tuck into this little channel. Make sure it's fully inserted. And you'll feel that rib going in underneath the liner. And then stop a few inches short of the corner. We'll rotate the door around. And we'll do the same thing on the opposite side. We'll start the gasket away from the corner and then work our way towards it. There's enough flexibility in that gasket that you can stretch it out around the corner. We'll use our putty knife again just to lift that edge up slightly. And then make sure it seats firmly around that corner. And once we get close to the next corner, we'll rotate the door again. Take our putty knife and make sure that corner is free. Sometimes it helps just to lift up on that gasket and rotate that rib out enough that it will slide underneath the liner. Now, along the bottom of the door, you may find a bit of food debris that has collected there over time, and you'll need to clean that up before you attempt to put the gasket on. And you can also use your putty knife if you cover the edge of it with a couple of layers of duct tape, just so that you don't have a sharp edge. You can use that to press in gently on the very edge of the gasket. That will allow you to fully insert it below the door liner itself, and that makes sure that it's seated properly. And once we've gotten close to the other corner, we'll rotate the door again. We'll make sure that that corner is free, and gently stretch that gasket around the corner. Now, the areas that will give you the most trouble are where that plastic cap is for both the top and the bottom of the door, as it does project a little bit higher than the outer door panel. So you have to work very carefully in that area to make sure that you do get the gasket underneath the door liner. And just gently pry that away enough that it will fit. And then continue along the last side. Rotate the last time. And then make sure we have that last corner firmly in place. Again, you can use that putty knife just to make sure that that gasket is firmly seated below the door liner. And then just carefully inspect all the way around again to make sure that we didn't miss any spots. The gasket should fit tightly against the outer door panel and form a nice smooth seal in that area. And take careful note in the corners, make sure that we have a proper seal there. And now we're ready to put the door back on the refrigerator. So we'll carefully lower the refrigerator door onto the bottom hinge. Just pivot it to make sure that it's fully seated on the hinge. Rotate it into position. We're going to take our center hinge, make sure that the spacers are still intact. We'll drop that into the opening on the top of the fresh food door, and then we'll pivot the hinge into the screws. We'll insert the one on the right and just tighten that enough that it will hold the door in place, and then we'll align the door. Just check down both sides to make sure that it's parallel with the cabinet, and tighten the screws securely. And using our wrench, we'll tighten the bottom screw on the left side and make sure those are both secure. We're now ready to put the freezer door on. And again, we'll lower that hinge opening onto the center hinge, rotate the door into position, take our upper hinge, place it in position, and locate the screw holes. And you may need to lift up on the door slightly to rotate the hinge, as you can locate those holes. I suggest you start these screws by hand just to make sure that we don't get them cross-threaded. Now, just before we tighten them, we want to make sure that we have an even gap between the freezer door and the fresh food door. And if you need to, loosen one of the screws enough to adjust it. And tighten it firmly. We're now ready to turn the refrigerator back on. And our repair is complete.